Hello, Consciously Parenting community. I'm Jen Kobrick. I'm a holistic family consultant with the Consciously Parenting Project, and welcome to the Conscious Coffee Break. Today, we're going to be talking about co-regulation, which, if that is a totally new term to you, is a way of talking about this phenomenon where our nervous system and our child's nervous system, or another person, it doesn't have to be a child, that they communicate. And so I'm sure that you've seen this in action where your child or your partner is upset about something and you get upset too. And so as you start to get agitated, they get more agitated. And then because they're agitated, you get more agitated and you feed off of each other like a ping pong ball, right? And if you're lucky, you've also experienced this in reverse, where someone else is upset and you're able to stay calmer, not like frozen lake, totally shut down, but truly calmer, like, I hear that, I get that, I understand that, and I'm here for you. That kind of sense, which then in response the other person starts to calm a little bit, and then you calm more, and that the ping pong ball goes the other way in regulating everyone instead of dysregulating everyone, right? So that's what we're talking about. That's what co-regulation means. But specifically what I'm going to talk about today is how this works when a child is really dysregulated. Because one of the things that's really common is that when a child is having a hard time with something that seems small from an adult perspective, adults want to go into logic and fixing and explaining and rational explanations and talking about it. And part of that is because our culture really prizes logic and emotionless, robotic, talking and being very, very logical and concrete. And part of that is also because as adults, we have fully developed prefrontal cortex, which is where that happens, where that thinking and problem solving and logical stuff happens. And that's not fully developed until someone's in their 20s. So for young children especially, but even for middle school age or teenage children, it's not fully developed. And so there's much more of the time children spend in their midbrain, in their emotional brain, than adults do. And so it's really common for adults to go into this, problem solving, fix it mode, while children are going further back into their brain, into their emotional brain. And so they're fully present with the experience of disappointment, frustration, anger, irritation, fear, whatever they're feeling, and the adult is over here trying to have a logical conversation, and the feeling is not capable of the logical conversation, right? And so that disconnect can sometimes send the child all the way back into their fight, flight, or freeze response. And often as adults, we then go back to our fight, flight, or freeze response, which is partly because of that co-regulation piece, right? Our nervous system is responding to their dysregulation by becoming dysregulated. And it's partly because we're responding to our own emotional reaction to their dysregulation. So if we're thinking, this is a small thing, we should be able to fix this and solve this. This is not a big deal. Why are you acting like this? And the child is becoming more and more dysregulated instead of problem solving with us, then we start to have an emotional experience of frustration, anger, irritation, that this is not going the way we think it ought to go. And so that pulls us back into our emotional brain and then can pull us further back into our fight, flight, or freeze response. So that in and of itself might be something where you want to pause this and digest that a little bit and see if you can recognize that dynamic, because it can be a really powerful thing to even recognize as an adult. Oh, I'm feeling frustrated that my child is not logically problem solving with me right now. That we even to recognize that experience of that emotional brain as an adult in that moment can be really powerful, because then we can be present with that emotion, which actually can be really regulating for our children, because then we're meeting them in the emotional brain where they are, and can connect in that space of, we're kind of both there together without going all the way into fight, flight, or freeze. But the other part that I wanted to talk about today about that co-regulation is that children are especially tuned in to the emotional state of their caregiver, because they are dependent on us. So if a caregiver is dysregulated, then a child is automatically going to be in a space of, where's the emergency? If an adult is in fight, flight, or freeze, then a child is biologically programmed to also go into a fight, flight, or freeze, because their survival depends on the adult's survival. And if the adult is in survival mode, then the child is automatically going, okay, we have an emergency here. How do I survive? So if a child is already having a hard time with whatever the thing was that started the interaction, whatever the challenge was in the first place, and then the adult goes into fight, flight, or freeze, now the child is thinking, okay, this is really a true emergency. I was thinking it was a, frustrating thing, but it's an emergency. And that can make it basically impossible for the child to regulate and to come back to a more rational thinking place. So in that space, if we as adults can take a few moments to take a few breaths and recognize, okay, I am not rational right now. I am totally flipped my lid. I'm on my red light. I'm in survival mode. I'm in fight, flight, or freeze, whatever the language is that you can connect with. And taking a few breaths and feeling contact with, our feet or a seat if we're sitting down, feet if we're standing. We can reach out and touch the wall and feel that contact. Any way that we can feel something physical to bring ourselves back into our bodies can start to regulate us as adults. And as we start to move out of a red light state, we don't need to be perfectly calm. And in fact, it can be helpful to not be totally rational when our child is in this emotional place. But if we can calm our reaction enough to move out of that fight, flight, freeze, survival, emergency state, then our child will co-regulate. Our child can start to pick up on that. This is not actually an emergency. I can calm down out of that need to respond to this as if it's a life or death emergency. And as they start to co-regulate, then we can start to connect with them, which will help us to regulate, help the child to regulate. And it's bringing that co-regulation ping pong ball towards the calming reflection back and forth of each other's emotional state. So the big takeaways here from today is first, if this concept of co-regulation is new, then look at how that shows up in your interactions. If you're dysregulating with someone or regulating with someone. And the other piece of this to take away is that when we're in survival mode, our nervous systems are responding as if it's a life or death situation. And our children are acutely attuned to our emotional state. So if we're in survival, they will go into survival. And so if we can find the tools to ground and regulate ourselves, even just a teeny bit, that can start that process of co-regulation between adult and child. And the last thing that I want to say about this is that it's not easy to do that. If that has not been your experience, if you have not had the experience of co-regulating with someone, and if you're on your own, that this is something that you have to experience yourself to be able to give someone else. So if you haven't, then experiencing that in a healing story circle or a one-on-one call or with another person who can compassionately listen and hear you where you are and co-regulate with you can help you start to have this tool to then bring into your own family and with your children. So we have some free healing story circles, and we have our membership course open for just a little bit longer. You can find information about both of those at consciouslyparenting.com. The link will, of course, be in the description for the video. And if you have questions about co-regulation, or if you're seeing a pattern showing up in your family, or if you're thinking, yeah, this sounds great, but I can't do it, then please comment with your questions, your challenges, your concerns, and we'll be happy to help you. And have a great week. I will see you next week on the next Conscious Coffee Break.